וגם אני פתאום רואה את הקולות.
And welcome back to another episode of Kolot. This is your host, Rabbi Hillel Kappenstein, director of the Columbus Community Kollel, and it's a great honor and privilege to welcome all of you back to our next episode featuring Rabbi Daniel Glatstein. It's so interesting that we're recording this episode right after Rabbi Glatstein visited our community, which was an incredible experience, spoke several times throughout Shabbos and Sunday morning, and very inspiring and really so befitting for Kolot because Rabbi Glatstein speaks on so many different topics ranging from halacha, hashkafa, history, and so much more. So we're going to discuss all of that plus more right here on Kolot. To sponsor a Kolot episode, email me, sponsorkolot@gmail.com. Once again, that is sponsorkolot@gmail.com. And without any further ado, allow me to tell you about our guest. Rabbi Daniel Yaakov Glatstein is the Rav of Kehilas Tiferes Mordechai and Machon Magid Harakia Torah Center, public speaker, author, prolific researcher, pulpit rabbi, and teacher with a global following, and one of the most popular English-speaking Torah teachers in the contemporary Jewish landscape. The Rav was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, and now resides in the Five Towns with his wife, children, and family, where he furthers his research, writings, and teachings to the masses worldwide via the internet, his local community, and holy Kahal Kadosh. Rabbi Daniel Glatstein, thank you so much for joining Kolot.
Hi, Rabbi Kappenstein. How are you? Shalom Aleichem.
Good.
Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. The honor is ours. So, as a way of introduction, I wanted to know if you could share with us a little bit of your background and your upbringing.
Okay. I was born in Brooklyn, New York. My father's from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My mother is from Brooklyn. But a lot of my background goes back to my grandparents. Maybe we'll come to that a bit later. But I went to Yeshiva Tar Tamima. I went to Yeshiva Tiferes Yisrael, which is a Chafetz Chaim Yeshiva in Brooklyn for high school. I learned in Eretz Yisrael for a short stint in Yeshiva Chafetz Chaim in Eretz Yisrael, and I was in RSA. That's Yeshivas Rabbeinu Yisrael Meir HaKohen Baal Chafetz Chaim, the Chafetz Chaim in Queens for many years. I probably have one of the longest tenures in yeshiva because after spending many years in Kollel, I was a Rav in Kew Garden Hills. So I was morning seder and afternoon seder in the yeshiva even after I left the yeshiva. So I was there for quite a while, but I have many influences outside of the yeshivas that I attended, and the yeshivas I attended gave me a very solid foundation in the fundamentals, let's say you would call it, of learning and Musar. But I have many rabbeim and mentors that I learned from, and have the great fortune of being able to share a little bit what I've learned.
And who were some of those influences and mentors that you were so privileged to have?
Okay, as I mentioned, when you go to Yeshiva New York, so every year you have a different Rebbe, but certainly the Rebbeim in high school had a big hashpah on me. I was now Rabbi David Harris is the Rosh Yeshiva of the Chafetz Chaim network of yeshivas, but back then he was my 9th grade Rebbe. He taught me how to learn Gemara. He taught me Akasha, Teretz, Rashi, and Tosfos. So I was very privileged to have a number of Rosh Yeshivas as high school Rebbeim. I had a Rebbe who I was very close with in 10th grade, Rabbi Elio Meza, who I used to learn with privately as well. And a lot of the influence in my life is my family. My grandfather, my father's father, is a Holocaust survivor. He was a Rav in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, not too far from Columbus, Ohio. I don't know how long, but he was a Rav in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for only 70 years, that's a very long tenure in the rabbinic world. A year is a long tenure in the rabbinic world. So, and he was a Holocaust survivor, but before the war, he was close with Gedolim in Europe. He was close with Rabbi Menachem Zemba, Rabbi Shlomo David Kahana, and his grandfather was close with the Malbim. So my grandfather passed away 2 years ago at 106 years old, Rabbi Rabbi Glatstein. He brought me back literally 160 years. He brought me back to his grandfather, who was close with the Malbim. I mean, if you see my top right shelf, I have my grandfather's set of Malbim. So when you grow up and you feel a connection to, not just Gedolim who lived in 1940, 1930. We're talking about Gedolim who lived in 1860. I grew up hearing the Malbim. My grandfather was so close to the Malbim. His own name, Mordechai Leib ben Yosef Menachem, is Rashi Tevis Malbim. So, you're growing up feeling connected to generations and generations ago. It makes a big impact. My father is a practicing attorney, and in his spare time he lectured for Eshat Torah Discovery. So he did kiruv across the country in college campuses across the country. So as a young boy, I would travel with my father to different Shabbatons or college campuses, and you grow up seeing how the authentic message of Torah changes people's lives. You could have somebody completely secular, someone who doesn't know Shema Yisrael, and they're exposed to the truths of Torah Sinai, and in a weekend or in a Shabbos and a Sunday, their lives are changed forever. So you grow up learning the impact of the message of Torah. My mother's father, Rabbi Shimon Hirschfang, was a stockbroker, but also someone who I spent a lot of time with. He learned with me personally, and his own hanhaga and his own dedication to Torah mitzvahs also made a very, very deep impression on me. So, I always say I like to walk. When I grew up in Flatbush, I grew up on M and 31st, and when I was a bacher, so I was in Yeshiva Chavetz Chaim, but I would sometimes legally or illegally come home for Shabbos. And I used to go to Harav Avigdor Miller. It was quite a long walk, maybe 45 minutes. If you look at my top shelf, top center, those are all, Rav Miller's Sfarim. So I even have a notebook of questions I asked him. So Rav Miller was about a 45-minute walk. And being able to go to him also had a very big hashpah on me. But he used to like to walk. He was a big walker. I love to walk. When I walk, you look at it. You look at these big trees. You see that the bigger a tree is, the deeper its roots need to penetrate in order to absorb as much hydration and nutrients as possible. And I think it's the same thing with every individual. The higher you want to elevate yourself, the more you have to connect yourself to your roots. So the more you're able to absorb from your parents, your grandparents, your ancestors, the more of an advantage you have in elevating yourself.
So nice. Wow. Beautiful.
Yeah.
And maybe can you share a story, a personal encounter with the Rav Avigdor Miller, something that really sticks with you to this day?
Yeah, a lot of people, they would go to his shiur and they like to say, they're a Talmud of his or they're very close to him. I don't like to use that lightly because, I was maybe 19, 20, 21, something like that. And these were the last 3 years of Rav Miller's life. But I did ask him many questions, and one particular insight that he shared with me, I've been thinking a lot about lately. Now we're living in the age of artificial intelligence. That's the hottest topic, AI, chat GPT. And, could you ask them a shaila? And I remember asking him the following question: why is it that in the Chumash, it never talks about the mind? Right? And when it talks about chachma, wisdom is in the heart, is in the leiv. Why doesn't it talk about wisdom in the maya? It never uses the word mayach. it always says, "Uvelev kol chacham lev nasati chachma v'libi ra harbe chachma." And Rav Miller looked me in the eye, and he said, "Thoughts are fleeting. Doesn't matter what you think; it matters how you feel about that thought. If just because you believe in Hashem, okay, everyone believes in Hashem, and the next minute somebody could take a misstep, somebody could uh, do a sin. So what happened? What happened to your belief? Is it that you don't believe? No, of course you believe, but you're not feeling it because a thought does not have an impact on you until you feel it. So the Torah always refers to thoughts, the mind as the heart, because not until you have an emotion about the thought is the thought significant. So I've been thinking a lot about that recently because, in the age of artificial intelligence, I think it's a very big message to us that perhaps all of our intelligence has become very artificial.
Mm.
And, we know a lot of information. We live in a generation where we, even yeshiva students, even people who are living a Torah life, we know a lot of information. We know a lot of Torah. Maybe we know more Torah than a generation or two ago. But the feeling we have to it has waned. In other words, we believe in Hashem, but do we feel Hashem in our streaming through our veins? We believe in reward and punishment. We believe Hashem is watching us, but we don't feel it the same way our grandparents did. So maybe Hashem is reminding us a little bit. We need to upgrade our intelligence to something beyond the artificial.
Mm-hmm. And can you give us maybe a practical piece of advice how one could take thoughts, transition them, transform them into feelings?
That was the whole objective of the Musar movement of Rabbi Salanter. Now, Musar is the most unpopular subject in our generation. Everybody likes machshava because machshava is not threatening, because again, it's just in your mind. Everyone even likes Kabbalah and va'ani b'chlalam. I like something mystical or even Chasidus, but Musar has a bad rap, and Musar is unpopular. But the objective of learning Musar is to basically review again and again and again the truths that are already evident, and review it until it becomes more than just something in your mind. Rabbi Salanter would say the greatest distance in the world is the space between your head and your heart, because everything is here, but it hasn't traveled down to the heart. Yeah. Even Esav had a good head. His head made it into the Ma'aras HaMachpelah. It's the rest of him. But that's the avodah in life. And there are many ways of sort of transferring the database that's in the head to the heart. Whether it's, I always feel that every Jew, whatever capacity they're in, whether you're a Rebbe, a Rosh Hashiva, could be a doctor, a lawyer, a plumber, an electrician, everyone has to teach Torah. Not just learn, everyone has to teach. Whether it's your classroom, whether it's your family sitting around the table, whether it's your wife, whether it's your husband, find an opportunity, whether it's a chavrusa, someone who's not as learned as you, because putting yourself in a situation where you have to give over forces you to bring out that which you know in a more meaningful, deeper, real way. And that teaching information is one way to highlight, to deepen that which you know.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned earlier that Rabbanus is long for 70 years and also long even for a day, right?
Yeah.
So when did you decide that, Rabbanus, that might be my gig? When did that happen for you?
That's a good question. People think that, I was like born a Rav, people thought I was a Rav before I even had a name, but actually it was not something that I was planning on necessarily when I was a teenager or even in Kollel. It's sort of, for me, it developed on its own. It was pretty organic, it was pretty natural. I was learning in Kollel, and I was davening in a shul, and I noticed the shul didn't have a Rav at the time. and Shachris was over in the morning, and people would just disappear after the Shir Shel Yom. So I suggested, maybe we should have a Dvar Halacha in the shul, and this way, people they're wrapping up their tefillin, they could catch some Divrei Torah on the way out. So of course they had a board meeting, and the board voted 7-6 that it was a good idea, but they said it was such a good idea. It was your idea, so you do it. No, my idea was they should have some kind of round robin. So it literally started. I would prepare 3 hours a day for a 3-minute Dvar Halacha, and I prepared it very thoroughly. I try to pack in very cogently, very coherently the halacha in an interesting way, an interesting format, interesting packaging. And somehow, here's something that's very important in the world of Rabbanos. People appreciate preparation. Sometimes I hear people get up for Shabbat Brachas, and they say, I'm not really prepared. I'm thinking, pal, if you're not prepared, sit down immediately and stop wasting my time. If you're not prepared, why do I need to listen to this? It's not right. It's gazela, So people appreciate preparation, and I have to tell you, these were people. They were running out of shul, and they stopped and they paid attention and they listened and they started to record it and they would listen to it. And I learned a very important lesson from that people want to grow, people want to learn, people want to connect to Torah, but you need to deliver it in a way that's suitable to them. And preparation is really the key. So from there, I was recommended to give a shiur in the Young Israel of Kew Garden Hills, and then a certain shul, there was an opening, and somebody said I should throw my hat in and I was the last man standing. So I became a Rav in Kew Garden Hills, in a shul, Torah Emes, which was the first Orthodox shul in Queens. It was a big old American pulpit synagogue. It was like a stepping stone type of job, and people started coming. At first it was mostly older people, but people started coming, and we built it up a little bit until it was time for us to leave that neighborhood. But I remember one of the biggest developments in my life. I was learning at the time. I used to give a class a few nights a week in Great Neck, and I had a student, Michael Levy, and Michael says, there's this new thing, Torah Anytime. You might want to video your Shiurim. I said, come on, Michael. There's 7 guys that come to the shiur over here. Well, who's going to be watching the shiur? He said, no, you wouldn't believe it. If you put the shiur up online, I'll tell you. I said, what's online? I was a yeshiva bacher. I want to tell you, I had never been on a computer in my life. I was already married, and this was not so long ago. Now I have to become a whole a technical operator with all the different platforms and venues. At the time, not only was I never on the internet before, I never turned on a computer. I had taken computers in 11th grade, but I think there were like 8 computers and 9 students. So I opted to be the student without the computer. I got the final was like 100 questions out of 250 questions. I memorized all 250 answers, and I did well on the final without having ever turned on a computer. So I remember we started posting shiurim on the computer, and I would go to the Torah Anytime offices, and I would ask them, how many people watched the shiurim this week? And they would tell me, I don't know, 700 people watched this week. And I said, wow, 700 people watched the shiurim this week. And now 700 in a day is, maybe on Shabbos, there are only 700 people, between the different time zones. But, the technology really of Torah Anytime, and then after that, many other later platforms really expanded the viewership and what a Marbitz Torah could do. It used to be if you're a Rav in a shul, so you had your balabatim, so you had your 20 people who came to the daf, or your 15 people who came to the Chumash Rashi, and you're capped at that. Now, literally, you could be in your Dalet Amos, and the world is your base medrash. There's infinite possibilities. I mean, it's amazing how, over the years, individuals who have contacted, and I'm sure it's the same for many Magidei Shiurim, but literally people from all over the world, Midala Conference Arts, you didn't even know there were Jews in these places.
No, I will reference anyone listening should definitely check out the episode God's Reason for the Internet featuring Shimon Kol Yaakov. Check out that episode after you finish listening to this episode, and you get to hear the incredible story of how that happened, and an interesting journey that definitely takes some very, very wild turns for the positive.
Yeah, but look, there are many venues today, like what you're doing now, the advent of podcasts also expanded. Not everybody's listening on computer, and there are many venues. I like to give Torah any time. Loi mishpat habachayra. They were the first ones, but Baruch Hashem, they started many
trend. It was a trend, yeah, for sure, absolutely. And before we move to our next segment, can you share with us overall how has the experience of being a Rav, how has that been? And maybe share with us what's the most challenging and the most rewarding.
Look, I started the Rabbanos pretty young. And I thought that what would be challenging would be, will older people, have the humility and the respect to accept from a younger person. And that was never an issue. It's amazing. That was never, nobody ever came to me and said, you're much younger. If anything, the challenge is the other way around. The younger generation, let's just say, doesn't always have the same respect that the older generation has. And Derech Eretz and respect in the Rabbanos is somewhat of a prerequisite for a person to be able to be makabel from a Rav or a Rebbe. In other words, a Rav and a Rebbe, they're friendly with you, but they're not your buddy. They're someone who loves you. And I think the biggest lesson that I learned over the years is to ignore. In other words, this is a general life lesson. People are going to say things to you behind your back or to you, and they don't really mean it. They're going to say things that are insulting. They're going to say things that are hurtful. And I think probably the area that I've grown the most through the Rabbanos is really ignoring what people say and not paying attention to it. The best way you could deal with it is not paying attention, because very often the people themselves, they don't mean it. They don't mean to hurt you, or even if they do, they don't know better. I remember really a couple of weeks ago, I was giving a shiur on Zmanim, and then we daven mincha, and I was davening Shemona Esrei, and I don't make the tzibur wait for me for Shemona Esrei. When I basically get up to Moedim, I have them go ahead. This way I could say Kedusha with the minyan, but I don't make them wait for me. But there was one guy I know, he davens rather quickly. And while I'm davening Shemona Esrei, I overhear him saying to the guy next to him, he's like, I don't understand. The rabbi talks about Zmanim, so why does he daven such a long Shemona Esrei? Right? So I think maybe when I started in the Rabbanos, I may not have been able to ignore that. Now it's, it's part of it's par for the course. It's part of, it's the price of doing business in New York. And ignoring things that people do and say is usually the best approach in order to avoid any kind of confrontation. But in terms of the most rewarding part is education. When you see people have a deeper connection to tefillah based on shiurim that you've been learning together, when you see people have a deeper connection to learning, when you see people have an excitement to give over insights that you've learned together, that's of course the most rewarding part.
And let's get to that in our next segment. I want to talk about some of that, you've given over, but not just in Shiurim, but also in your Sfarim and the books that you have you've written. So what was your first sefer? What was your first book? And maybe share with us a highlight.
Okay. So I'll answer that question twofold. My first published book was a sefer in Lashon Kodesh. It's called Magid Rakia on Purim. And the fact that I have a sefer is, to me, it's like a nest. It's a miracle. Like how in the world did that happen? How is that possible? I had grandparents, great grand before the Holocaust, who were far greater, but they never had the resources. They never had the peace of mind, the put to writing and to publish Chidushei Torah. So to me, it's a great miracle that I have a sefer. And actually having a sefer is a lot like having a child. There's definitely Sar Leda, without getting into details, the publishing process, the graphic design, the layout, the timing of making sure it's edited by the deadline, making sure it's going to be printed so that it can be sent to Eretz Yisrael, so it can be put on the boat that should get here in time for Purim. You write a sefer on Purim, if it comes Pesach, then you're lucky if you sell 3.5 copies, So, but it's an exhilarating feeling, especially, people, again, in the age of technology, you'll get a picture from someone on the other side of the world reading the sefer, a week after it comes out. There's no other feeling in this world that's comparable to that. So the sefer on Purim, one of the reasons why I chose to write on Purim, my grandfather, Rabbi Glatstein, his bris was on Tainus Esther. It was named after Mordechai, and because he survived the Holocaust and he saw Haman face to face, he saw Eichmann face to face, and he saw Amalek and he overcame. So my grandparents always celebrated their birthday on Purim. So to our family, Purim was like the national Yom Tif of our family. And I had what I thought were some pretty amazing chidushim. I consider them gifts from heaven on Purim, and I just had a desire to publish on Purim. You asked if I could share a highlight. If I could share just one brief thought, and really over the years I've really developed this further. But we know the Megillah ends rather unusually that Achashverosh taxes the people, which is quite bizarre. I mean, that's the grand finale of the Megillah, that Achashverosh taxes the people. I mean, who cares that he taxes the people? So, cutting to the chase, one of the major themes of the Megillah is how Hashem uses every plan of the enemy. He doesn't thwart the plan. He uses the plan and causes that plan to boomerang and to backfire on the enemy. So I was learning Sefer Ezra, and in Sefer Ezra we read that the Jewish people want to rebuild the second base of Mikdash. They didn't have the funding, so they go to Daryavesh if he could help them out. And the pasuk says that Daryavesh said, "All right," and he opens up the treasury of taxes and he funds the building of the second base of Mikdash. So it occurred to me, I think this is a gift from Shamayim. It occurred to me, when he opened up the treasury of taxes, where did he get all the tax money from? We know Daryavesh was the son of Achashverosh. So the Megillah ends, Achashverosh taxes the people. Achashverosh dies, Daryavesh inherits it. He gives all the money to the Jewish people to fund the building of the second base of Mikdash. So while the Megillah begins that Achashverosh is celebrating that the temple will never be rebuilt, by the end of the story, and you're going to appreciate this as a fundraiser, he's become the chief fundraiser to rebuild the second Beis Hamikdash. I mean, you see the irony. Now, when Achashverosh is celebrating that party, he thinks he's celebrating the eternal destruction of the second Beis Hamikdash. Little does he know that party will bring the downfall of Vashti. He'll marry Esther. He'll have a kid, Daryavesh. So that party will rebuild the second Beis Hamikdash. So really, that was the first great fundraising dinner. If anybody asks Rabbi Kappenstein, where was the first great Torah fundraising dinner? It was in Shushan. But more recently, I've tried to develop this idea that this is something we find throughout history. For instance, we're going to Spain. We're doing a Jewish heritage trip on July 10th. Ferdinand and Isabella, they want to put an end to all Jewish life and Jewish tradition. But I always say, do you know who really built Lakewood Yeshiva? Everyone would say, Rabbi Aaron Cutler. No. It was built by Ferdinand and Isabella. Why? Because they're the ones who commissioned Columbus to discover America so that there could be a Lakewood Yeshiva. So they think the Inquisition, they think on 1492 they're going to destroy all Jewish life forever. No, God says you're going to be the instrument to rebuild the greatest center of Torah study in the history of the world. So this is a common theme, where Hashem used Stalin to be the one to recognize the state of Israel because Stalin thought Israel would go communist. So he was the one who without Stalin, there would be no state of it. There would be no Mir Yeshiva. So, Stalin builds the Mir, and Ferdinand builds Lakewood, and Achashverosh builds the second Beis Hamikdash. So, that's an example of an insight in the Megillah, but it's like a flash of lightning. You see history differently based on that.
Wow, we got some great stats here tonight, and I will say that dinner had a different budget than what our dinners have on many levels. You mentioned your trip to Spain, and I wanted to, maybe a little more broadly, if you could tell us about some of the other trips, that trip as well, that upcoming trip as well, but some of the other trips that you've taken, some of the things that you were able to see, witness, discover, and how that's impacted people.
Okay. If I may, you asked me before about some of my mentors. I would be remiss if I didn't mention one particular Rav, and that will segue us into what you just asked me. And that is when after I was married, I used to go to Harav Noach Isaac Olbaum, who I'm very close with, and I used to go to Shiurim, and aside from being a tremendous guy in learning and Bucky and a great Paisik and Talmud Chacham, but he was also very well versed in history, and he would always refer to when he would talk about, let's say, Maharam Rutenberg or other Rishonim, he would mention, he was in Germany or he was in Prague, and the trips that he made to visit the Kfarim or the shuls or the cities where these Gedolim lived and flourished, it brought his Shiurim to life. When he would talk about the Maharam Rutenberg, you could see that the fact that he stood at the kever, the Maharam Rutenberg, it meant a completely different connection that he had to this great Rishon, who we all know as a name, but we don't have that. Like we said before, to many it's just a piece of knowledge. It's not alive, and that really, I guess, sparked within me the interest to learn about the history of the Gedolim, and if I have the opportunity to be able to travel there myself. And so I started joining some of these trips. At first, I started as one of the speakers on one of these heritage trips, and then I began with Leleches, which is now Avir, organizing them myself. We've been to many countries. We've been to Germany. We've been to Austria. We've been to Bratislava, Ukraine. Last summer, we went to France. To me, that was, spectacular to visit the city of Rashi. I mean, of course, Rashi is who doesn't know Rashi? Even secular Jews know Rashi. Certainly, Talmidim in yeshivas. But I tell you, Rabbi Kappenstein, I was learning Rashi my whole life. But I decided, I looked up Rashi's yard site, Chav Tes Tammuz, and I said, look, it's the middle of the summer. I got to get to Troyes for Rashi's yard site. And to me, sometimes even more than being there, preparing to be at Rashi. Now, there's we're not certain that Rashi is buried right there. There is some kind of monument, but we're not sure that's actually his kever, but it's not really that important. It is the actual kever, it's not the actual kever. Rabbi Kappenstein, I want to tell you, I learned Rashi my whole life. But in the months leading up to visiting Rashi's kever, my connection to Rashi has deepened 1,000-fold. Learning about Rashi's history, where he was born, who his rabbeim were, who his son-in-laws were, his ambition to build a bias of Torah. I mean, all of Klal Yisrael is from the bias of Rashi. You know that 80% of Ashkenazic Jews trace directly back to Rashi? Because in the 11th century, there are only 10,000 Ashkenazic Jews. He has 5 daughters. Statistically, 80%, including myself, I have a tradition, come directly from Rashi. There's a Lashon in the Shita Mekubetzes, Rashi, Rabban ve'avihen shel Yisrael. He's the Rebbe, and he's the father of the Jewish people. Before last summer, those were words. Now I feel it in my bones. Rashi's our Rebbe. Rashi's our father. So that's just an example of it's not a very exotic kever. Rashi. I mean, it doesn't sound that. It's not like some kind of newfangled school. It's Rashi. I'm telling you, by traveling to these places, and then we went to Rabbeinu Tam. I'm telling you, compared to what Rabbeinu Tam is to me now, I look back and I say, no, I had no idea who Rabbeinu Tam was. To us, they're all the same. The Rivam, the Rihazakin, Rabbeinu Tam, they're just Balei Toises. No, now I feel like I could taste the character of each one. So, it gives a deeper connection to me, and I feel it makes my Shiurim and my presentations much more meaningful. So we were in Turkey. I have really amazing stories, if I could just very quickly. When we were in Izmir, I went to the kever of Reb Chaim Falaji. I just had it in my, I said, in this world, I have to visit Reb Chaim Falaji. I have a very special connection with the Sephardic giants. I'll tell you very briefly, we'll discuss it at a different time, at greater length. But after the Holocaust, my grandfather published for the survivors the first Sfarim. And the first sefer he published for the survivors was the Lev David of the Chida. And I feel because of that, I have a special connection to the Chida. Over there, I'm going over some of my shelves, but shelf on the right side, second down, and the third down are all the Sfarim of the Chida. And so I've been to the Chida, the Ben Ish Chai I've been at on Har HaZeisim, and Rabbi Vadia I've been at, but I always wanted to go to the Reb Chaim Falaji. So we went to Izmir, we went to the kever Reb Chaim Falaji. And I was walking around over there, and I see one kever is covered with weeds. I take off the weeds, clean off the dirt. Reb Yitzchak Falaji, the Rav of Izmir, son of Reb Chaim Falaji. So I didn't even know what to do with that. I never heard of Reb Yitzchak Falaji. So we did a quick clip, like a 30-second clip. We put up on Torah Anytime. We just discovered the kever of the Rav of Izmir, the son of Reb Chaim Falaji. It said on the kever he wrote the sefer. I said he wrote the sefer. That's all I knew about him. So that was the end of that clip. Okay. I come home that week. I'm giving Shiur's Parshas Kisisa. I said, I need a good topic for the Wednesday night share this week. I'm looking around. The topic that came to me was, could there be ayin hara if you teach Torah publicly? A person is not supposed to draw attention to themselves. But what if you're doing a mitzvah, you're teaching Torah? Could that draw ayin hara? So I see a tshuva from Reb Chaim Falaji. And then after like a paragraph, he says, the truth is that when it comes to this subject, my son, Rabbi Yitzchak Falaji, he wrote the comprehensive treatment of this subject. And he then quotes paragraphs from his son, Rabbi Yitzchak Falaji. I had not heard of him before that week. I had just literally unearthed his kever, and he's like, all right, thank you for uncovering me. I want to give you a little gift. And I have a few really good stories like that of very short. I'm going to tell you one more, whether you want to hear it or not. I'm going to tell you one more.
I want to hear it. I want to hear it.
Okay. This was during really right after COVID, right when COVID was waning, it depends where some communities COVID is not over yet. Some communities, it's long past. This was like sort of toward the end of COVID. I was having, summer travel withdrawal. So we made a small trip to, I needed to get people to go. So we put Karastir in there, of course. And then we went to Ukraine. Fine. In Ukraine, I had on my list, I wanted to go to the kever of the Taz, the Sma, the Shalom Meshiv, the Yeshuas Yaakov, and they were all buried in the city of Lemberg. There was no official kever, but I know there was a monument that said in this cemetery was buried these Gedolim. It was the end of our trip. There was terrible, terrible traffic. We needed to get back to the airport. the driver said, if we go to the kever, you're gonna miss your flight. But I'm thinking to myself, I don't. One of the reasons I came to Ukraine was to go to this kever. If I'm gonna go, and I don't want to come back here. So, Ribbon Hashem, please, I came all the way. Could we please be zoicha? Literally, the driver said he thinks he remembers a shortcut. He darts out of the traffic. He's, driving through the side streets. He says, "Get out!" I said, "Get out? Where are we getting out?" It's a hospital. Behind the hospital. I run out of the car. Behind the hospital is a monument for the Sma, the Taz, the Shalom Eshev, the Yeshuas Yaakov, and Rav Mordechai Ze'ev Atinga. Oh, Rav Mordechai Ze'ev Atinga. I figure, he must be very eminent if he's buried with these other four tzaddikim. But at the time, I wasn't even able to make a real clip because I didn't know who he was. So I made one for the Taz and the Sma and the Yeshuas Yaakov and the Shalom Eshev, and I said also buried as Mordechai Ze'ev Atinga. This was like on a Tuesday or Wednesday. That Friday, I come back, it's Erev Shabbos, I'm preparing a Shiur. It was Shabbos Chazoin. And I'm quickly preparing the Shiur, and I see an amazing question. The question is, we know the Beis Hamikdash were destroyed because they Shaloi Berchu B'Torah Tchila, right? Chazal say we didn't make Berchas HaTorah. So I see the question of the Magen Giborim. He asked, what do you mean they didn't make Berchas HaTorah? But we know that even if you don't say Berchas HaTorah, if you say Ahava Rabbah, it's good enough. So they said Avarabba, so what's the big deal? They didn't say Berchas HaTorah. That's the kasha of the Magen Giborim. Magen Giborim, of course, everybody knows. Mishabura quotes Magen Giborim come out on every page. So I'm giving the Shiur, and then I'm thinking to myself, who's the Magen Giborim? And I look up, Reb Mordechai Ze'ev Atinga.
Bingo.
And I don't think I ever gave a Shiur. The Shiur was on the Magen Giborim. Never happened before. But the day I came back, all of a sudden, I didn't know who he was, but he made sure I knew who he was. So I have a lot of stories like that. And, I feel that by preparing and learning about the history of these Gedolim, it deepens your connection to them at the very least.
I think we have a topic for your next book. Maybe you should make a collection of all these. Now, this is incredible. I want to be, before we move on to the current time period that we're entering, I just want to ask you, there's this, a lot of people have this desire to visit the places, the camps, Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen and all these places. What do you, what's your take on trying to connect to the Churban of Europe? For some it's, inspiring, for others it's depressing. And I guess at a more general level, what do you think the value of these trips are, and what do you think the takeaway should be?
It's interesting that with all of my travels, I've never been to the camps. I'm not resistant to going. My feeling has always been, I have been to the camps because my grandfather was there. I heard from him, so I don't need to see it. It's enough that he had to be there. But Bezos Hashem, one day I think I would like to go. Look, I think that if somebody feels that they don't have a connection to Churban Europe, and by going to the camps, they will have a more meaningful connection, then Matovu Manoim, then that will deepen their appreciation, understanding of what happened to the Jewish people in our own times. It's unfortunate that the Holocaust was only 70 years ago, and people, the new generation doesn't really know that much about it. So, somebody told me, who's in the Kiruv world, that even for the Frum community, again, I agree, whether I agree or disagree, that's not, I'm not saying that my opinion, I'm just telling you what a certain eminent leader in the Kiruv world today told me, that it used to be, of course, the Beis Medrash was the most compelling makayim to influence people to be committed Jew. And he feels that today and it's hard to fully support this, but I just want to, bring out this point. But he feels today that the trips actually have more an impact on even the frum community. Certainly the secular world, the trips are extremely impactful. I would say you definitely need a combination, but there is a certain like we started off the class, how could we bring what's in our mind and in our head as information, how can we bring it closer to our heart? These trips really do bring alive the history of the Jewish people, and it is a way of bringing it closer to our heart. So a person could try on Tisha B'Av to think about the destruction and all the various tragedies that happened to the Jewish people, but actually going to Auschwitz or some of the camps, that definitely will bring it closer to the heart.
Sure.
So I think if it will enhance a person's appreciation of our history, then it's a worthwhile activity.
As we speak, we are in the month of Tammuz as we record, and this will probably be aired right before Shavasar Tammuz. And I remember going to camp summer after summer. You get all excited. Like every summer, like camp has another theme song, and it's geschmack, and you have concerts, and then boom, the 3 weeks, and it's like, spoiler. Like, why does this have to come in the middle of Bein Hazman? Why does this have to come middle of summer vacation? Couldn't we just find another time, maybe in the winter, to have this like between Hanukkah and Purim? Like kind of like it's a spoiler to many. But it shouldn't be that way. And I know you wrote a book on A Darkness to Dawn, and I know we can't go through the entire book, but maybe share a perspective how the 3 weeks should really be looked upon and what the connection should be to every Jew about it.
Look, there's a beautiful commentary on Megillas Eicha written by Ben Ish Chai, and Ben Ish Chai basically explains the Psukim of Eicha based on what their positive spin will be when Mashiach comes. So, for instance, the pasuk says, "Vayetze mibasiya in kol hadara." So all the glory left Yerushalayim. So the Ben Ish Chai interprets as follows: when Mashiach comes, nowadays a lot of the glory of the Torah comes from Lakewood. But that's not how it's supposed to be. It's supposed to come kimitzia in Teisei Torah. So Mashiach comes, vayetze mibasiyon kol hadara. All the Torah will come from Tzion, which means that all the tragedy of the 3 weeks will be overturned one day. There's an idea that Tisha B'Av is called a Moyed because one of the reasons is it's a predestined time for the redemption. I always like to say, you ever notice, I don't know why this is not spelled out explicitly, but in Rajin, they say there's a connection between Tisha B'Av and Simchas Torah. What could the connection be? You know how on Yirmiyah was born on Tisha B'Av, and Kabbalistic there's an idea Yirmiyah is the Gilgal of Shlomo HaMelech. Shlomo is the Keneged Simchas Torah. Yirmiyah is Keneged Tisha B'Av. So Tisha B'Av L'Ra is what Simchas Torah is L'Toiv. You ever hear this? This is the niggin even that we use on Simchas Torah. We say Ki mitziyah in Teitzei Seira. It's Eicha. And if you end Udvar Hashem Yerushalayim, that's Eicha. But we don't end that way. It's Ki mitziyah in Teitzei Seira. Udvar Hashem Yerushalayim. Somehow with that knetch at the end, you schlep out the Eicha, you completely transform the niggin of Eicha into a festive niggin. So you sometimes wonder, we're gonna keep the same Eicha niggin. We'll just use that little knetch and we'll transform. So which means that the whole 3 weeks, it's like primed for a turnaround. The turnaround, it's prime for that. Actually, the Chida brings down that originally Rosh Hashanah was in Tammuz, Yom Kippur was in Av, and Sukkot was in Elul. and because of Churban, everything got stuffed and crammed into Tishrei. In fact, Avram Avinu, in times of Avram Avinu, that's how they celebrated the Yom Tovim: Rosh Hashanah and Tammuz, Yom Kippur and Av, and Sukkot and Tishrei. Samar Rebbe has a whole Torah why in Parshas Kisisa it says L'tkufas Hashana, and in Truma it uses a different lashon. One was before the Chedo Egel, the Yom Tov were 1 month, which means that this whole Zman, it's, we think it's soaked in tragedy. No, it's primed for transformation. Which and that's up to us. I had this chus just to be in your community, and the amazing observation of the Bnei Saschar, how the 3 weeks, if this will be relevant for Shavas B'Tammuz, the 3 weeks has 528 hours, corresponding to the prakim of Shas, and which means that our objective during this time of the year is, how do we reverse the cycle? How do we reverse the cycle? We mentioned, and the 5 tragedies of Shavas B'Tammuz, the luchos were broken, and the carbon tamid stopped being brought, and the city was breached, and they burnt the Torah, and they put up at Tzelem and the Heichal. The Aruch LaNer interprets that this is not referring to like 5 historical events, but it refers to sort of the downward progression of the Jewish people. It always starts from a lack of learning Torah, then it goes to diminishing the tefillah, and then the Torah is completely dissipated, and then the religion is abdicated. So therefore, this time of the year, we have to figure out how we're going to reverse the cycle, which then the first step is always strengthening Jewish learning and Jewish education. And, that's what you're doing in your community, strengthening the Torah study in your kollel. And, this gives us direction wherever we are involved, wherever we find ourselves, whatever community we find ourselves. We always want to know, how do we strengthen our community? How do we strengthen our shul? How do we strengthen our families? It always starts 528 hours in the 3 weeks correspond to 528-hour chapters in the oral law, in the Torah Shabbat Peh. That's where it starts. It starts strengthening Jewish learning. However we're able to strengthen it, the learning ourselves, teaching, and disseminating, Harbatzas HaTorah.
And I know you've written a lot about, and you've talked a lot about your grandfather, who was Nifter, you said, at 106, tremendous Arichas Yamim. I want to know if you could tell us a little, I'm sure we could do a whole episode just on that alone, but if you can maybe share some highlights of your relationship with your grandfather and some of the things that you learned from him that stick with you till today.
Look, my grandfather lived like 3 storied careers. He lived a life before the war, a tremendous sacrifice during the Holocaust, and then he was a Rav for 70 years after the war. Just, for this occasion, just to mention maybe 2 points. My grandfather never felt sorry for himself. He lived for 6 years in deprivation, without food, without home. Wherever he turned, there was torture, murder, cruelty of the highest order that no human being ever experienced. He even would say, he echoed the words of Yirmiyah Navi, Ani hagever ra'ani. And yet, we live in a generation where when people go through hard times, how much time do they spend wallowing in self-pity? How much time do they spend in the trauma, dealing with the trauma? If you would have met my grandfather, you would have thought that he grew up, he lost his father. His father was 26 years old when my grandfather passed away. My grandfather didn't even have a memory of his father. If you met him, you would have thought he grew up with 2 loving parents, growing up in the most nurturing, peaceful environment. He dedicated his life to encouraging Jews, breathing life into people, giving people strength. He didn't feel sorry for himself. You wouldn't even know he experienced trauma. He was made out of different material than your average bear, but it's a certain attitude toward life that you don't afford yourself the luxury. We don't wallow in self-pity. Basically, you pick yourself up, you dust yourself off, and you do whatever you can to build your family and to help other people. And he used the cruelty that he saw as a way to deepen his empathy and sympathy and compassion to other people, which is a rare reaction. How much time do people waste? Why did they do this to me? Why did this happen to me? Why did he say this to me? How much emotional energy do we waste on unimportant things? And sometimes, what people do to us or things that happen to us, of course it hurts. But that's how he dealt with it. And I think it's illuminating to see that dealing with it that way is sort of a person transcends even the most difficult circumstance. He also lived with what we call an emunah chushes, with not just the knowledge, but with the real deep conviction of the coming of the Geula and the redemption of the Jewish people. He said he believed every day be'emunah shalema that Mashiach was coming, even in the death camps in Dachau and Auschwitz. And throughout his life, in his final conversation with my father, it was Pesach, and my father asked my grandfather, Tati, everything okay? And my grandfather said, yeah, I'm just waiting for Mashiach. And those were his final words. So he was never Mesiach Das. He never diverted his mind. I remember one year on Pesach, he spent with our family. And after Yom Tov, said, Zaidi, how was Yom Tov? He said, it was beautiful. But now I'm just waiting for Mashiach. Now, we all say, everybody says they're waiting for Mashiach, but we say it, we just say words. My grandfather said it like, you would order something on Amazon. It says it's coming Monday or Tuesday. The doorbell rings, and you say it's probably your package. He waited for Mashiach, like a reality. So like we started off, there are a lot of things we know, but we don't have that same conviction, We don't have that same conviction. And connecting with our ancestors is also a way to deepen the ideals of the Torah and the ideals that of our tradition.
I think one of the challenges when it comes to Mashiach is so many times they say, yeah, it's coming. Yeah, it's going to be this day, or it's going to be this tragedy. Now Mashiach's for sure coming, and it hasn't come. And that's part of, I think that's part of the challenge of feeling, as we would say, that it's going, that every day we're anticipating it. How do you feel that we could strengthen ourselves to really yearn Mashiach?
Here's how I like to think of it. One of the stories that I like to say over that happened to my grandfather is he was thrown into the gas chamber, him and his brother. And at the last moment, they were yanked out. They were literally pulled out of the gas chamber. So I always think, okay, God saved my grandfather. But he didn't just save my grandfather. He saved my father. He saved me. He saved my children. Because I wouldn't be here today if my grandfather wouldn't have been yanked out of the gas chamber. People say, if only I would see a miracle like the splitting of the sea, then I would believe in God. But right now, I live in America. I'm a Yankee fan, which might be a mistake. And, I have a job. I have a nice shul. I send my kids to school. They go to camp. I go to a bungalow. If I would see a real miracle, then I would have real conviction. So you say, pal, the famous observation of Rabbi Yaakov Emden. He says, analyzing the state of the Jewish people in this world, after 2,000 years of Galus, we've been hounded we've been persecuted, crusades, Inquisition, pogrom, Holocaust. After everything we've endured, Rabbi Yaakov Emden says, I swear that when I contemplate the miracle of Jewish survival, it is much more miraculous to me than all the miracles that God performed in Egypt. So I always like to say, the people who left Egypt, they said, come on, God, you really want me to believe in you? Show me a real miracle like the Jew in 2022, then I would really believe in you. In other words, we have to put things in perspective. We like to say, we don't see anything miraculous. You don't see anything miraculous after a Holocaust to have an Eretz Yisrael with tens of thousands of Loimdei Torah, thousands of yeshivos, B'Artzeinu HaKadosha, whatever your political view is, but to have access to Mekayimos HaKadoshim we haven't had for 2,000 years. In the last 70 years, in 1930, there were many, many countries that had over 500,000 Jews. There were many countries, Morocco, Yemen, Iran, France, Russia. Do you know that every 10 years since, God empties out a country and says, overnight, all right, you're out of here. I know you're there. You've been here for 1,000 years. Time to leave. So Morocco empties out. And Yemen empties out. Iran empties out. Russia, 1 million Jews leave. I mean, look what's happening in front of our eyes in our generation. There's only one country today other than the land of Israel that has more than 500,000 Jews now. Even France is, I don't know if it has 500,000 Jews. Even England, I don't think, has 500,000 Jews. The brilliant Jews in America, we're the only ones who haven't figured it out. But, we see things are happening in front of our eyes. It doesn't happen in 1 minute, but just think about where we were. Think about where the Jewish people were 70 years ago. And think about where we are today. And if you don't see the open hand of Hashem in the most miraculous way in the history of the world, we're talking about bigger than the splitting of the Red Sea over here. The flourishing of Torah Judaism today after 2,000 years of Galus, it's the greatest open miracle in the history of the world. The splitting of the sea was like minor leagues compared to what's going on today. The plagues in Egypt were like, God knows that in our generation we need strengthening. So Hashem makes the greatest miracles in the history of the world. The greatest miracle is that you could open up a kollel in Columbus, Ohio, and people want to come learn. After 2,000 years of Galus, they want to learn the Torah. And the Torah we have after 2,000 years, it's the same Torah. It's unaffected. It's not diluted. There's no change. The same exact letters that Hashem gave Moshe Rabbeinu, we take out in my shul and your shul. We're still reading those the same scroll, the same words, the same mitzvahs. We're putting on the same tefillin. That's the greatest miracle. So if a Jew says, it's hard to believe. If it's hard to believe now, it was never any easier to believe, because the the greatest miracle that God ever performed is the continuous survival of the Jewish people. And that miracle he made for me, and he made it for you. So never was it easier to believe than it is today. But we just have to, so to speak, open our eyes and see what Hashem is doing for us.
I like how you said it. Rabbi Emden, he wouldn't just think, but he would contemplate on that. And I guess that, that's the theme of our dialogue is transforming it to a feeling. What started upstairs makes its way downstairs.
Yeah, and just to emphasize, for Yaakov Emden was astounded by the miracle of the survival of a Jew 250 years ago, before the Holocaust. What would he say today?
Right. Amazing. We were very privileged to have you for a Shabbos, and we were exposed to a little bit to your Torah, a little bit of your wisdom. I felt like 4 or 5 lectures weren't enough, but Baruch Hashem with Torah anytime, and the other platforms we could always download more. But I wanted to ask you, maybe you could share with us a little bit of what was your experience. What was it like for you to spend the Shabbos in Columbus, Ohio?
But Columbus is a beautiful community. It's a storied community. It's the capital of Ohio. And we always have to, like the Chavetz Chaim would say, the roadmap in heaven is different than the roadmap down here. In heaven, there were big cities. There was a city called Radin, Radin. You look on the map, it's a speck of dust. What's Radin? I used to hear about the city of Dvinsk. How big was Dvinsk? You start Ashrei, if you're on the wagon, by the time you got up to Soimech Hashem L'chol HaNoiflim, you're in the next city. But in heaven, Dvinsk is a big city because you have Torah luminaries. And Jewish communities are measured by Torah learning and Torah education. And it's really beautiful to see a city that has an established kollel, because, the heartbeat and the source of vitality of a Jewish community is its centers of Torah study. And, if a person wanted to see the trends of a city, is the Torah study increasing? So then the city is generally trending up. And if the institution of Torah study are not, then it's trending down. So, Baruch Hashem, Columbus has a kollel, has batei knesiyos, and all of those dedicated ambassadors of Torah who are working to bring the message of Torah to their respective city are really the heroes of the Jewish people. And every city has to recognize that in order to upgrade and develop the community, it's one ingredient only. It's Jewish education. And the best thing that could happen to a city is to develop yeshiva system, yeshiva network, and that helps the city, so to speak, what we call trending upward. So kol hakavod for everything that you do for your community, and for the kollel, and for bringing the message of the kollel to a broader audience through this platform. But really wonderful community and wonderful people, and as a Hashem, you should be successful in your mission.
Amen. Yeah, and a special shout out to all the people that helped make it happen. There are going to be more than it's going to be hard to say everyone, but that made it an amazing Shabbos, and it was a treat for us. I hope we'll be able to host you again in the near future. And thank you again for coming on Kolot. This was an incredible conversation. I'm sure many people are going to enjoy, and especially how timely it is when we're going to be airing this. So thank you again, and I guess I could return the bracha, the berachas hedjut, for at least for me, not for you, but to continue all the shiurim, all the learning, all the incredible trips, and everything else that's going on until, yes, Mashiach, it's on its way. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
To listen to all Kolot episodes and see upcoming guests, visit kolotpodcast.com. We are also on all podcast players. Type in Kolot on iTunes, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, Podbean, and Amazon. Share with your friends, and please make sure to give us a 5-star review. Kolot is a project of the Columbus Community Kollel, a full-time Jewish learning center in Bexley, staffed with high-caliber Torah scholars. Ever since 1995, boys, girls, men, and women from all backgrounds and affiliations have found many opportunities to connect with Torah and mitzvos at the Kollel. Whether it's a study partner, an engaging lesson, or a program, the Kollel is your one-stop shop for all your Jewish learning. If you want to know how you can benefit from the Kollel, visit thekollel.org. That is TheKollel.org, and forever be inspired.